The
Yeah.
privilege I have at this moment to speak to you, Jocelin Kagan. Am I right? Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
We are indeed, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, you have recently, the book has been published, Africa's Wild Dogs, a survival story. What I want to ask you is you're a photographer and an author, but who are you in essence? May we get to know Jocelyn a little bit better, the person?
I'm a person with a rich tapestry of history. I was teaching presentation skills to businessmen in the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. I paint, I used to draw. I then studied. I did a Henley MBA. I'm a person who loves books. I love the way people write. And then I moved into photography. I do have a very good eye for design. And I decided that I got to a stage in my life where I didn't want to work anymore. But I ended up taking photographs and then looked at this situation where they were all in my computer and nobody could see them. So I thought, no, that's no good. So I started producing little home books on home programs, and people loved looking at my photographs. So I thought, okay, let me take this a step further, which is what I have done. I came to work on Africa's Wild Dogs I first met the dogs about 10 years ago and fell in love with them. But my photography needed to develop, which I did. And then 5 years ago, I set out this intention to photograph them wherever I was in Southern Africa and to ultimately do something with the images. And now we have the book.
I want to ask you the question is you have a foundation, Africa's Wild Dog Survival Fund.
Yes.
What I need to know is you've actually done a whole lot of nature photography. You have been all over.
Yes, I have.
This is not something new to you. As you said, 5 years ago, you really intensely started looking at the wild dogs. Why wild dogs?
Wild dogs for me are very special. Now, I just want to give you the contrast. I've been into the Antarctic. I have photographed emperor penguins in the most blizzard type conditions. I have photographed in the Arctic polar bears, mums, and their cubs in minus 40 degrees in a blizzard. And that's incredibly harsh environment. And those animals came up as I was passionate about them. I was passionate about how they differed from Africa and from African animals. And when I started really looking at the wild dog, I found this elegant animal. The wild dog has legs that are just beautifully designed. They are long, they tapered, and the animal's body is thin. They move with an elegance which appeals to me. Their coloring. Now, we must remember when the wild dog is born, when the pups are born, there are two colors, they're black and white. And as they grow older, so this brown, this tawny comes in. And then there are this tricolor. And they are just exquisite. Now, every single animal has its own unique pattern. And that to me is part of design, is that we are all individuals and they are. They also display a social structure which is enviable to humans. We've been striving for that for years, but never quite come to it. The wild dog works together in their family. They've been called a pack, but they work together as a family. You have an alpha male and an alpha female, and it's generally the alpha male and female who mate, and they control the pack. And the entire family come together to make sure that those pups grow to maturity as best as those dogs can, the adults can protect them to grow to maturity. And that really appealed to me. This nurturing, this coming together. And also, if you look at the way the wild dog feeds, yes, his table manners are not particularly appealing. But then every animal in the wild has got something that's not appealing. And lest us human beings try and say we are totally appealing. And so when they kill, they disembowel the animal and they allow their pups to eat first. Now, you don't find that anywhere else in the animal kingdom. Even at a wolf pack, when a wolf pack kills, the adults eat and then they let the pups eat. Not with the wild dog. The wild dog, the adults have a couple of bites, then the pups eat. And they make sure they eat first, and they fill themselves. And those pups are greedy, and those little tummies swell and swell and swell until they literally are collapsing. They can't walk, their tummies are so full, and still they want more. And the adults are so generous; they will come and eat the scraps around the pups. And yes, if the adults need to, they'll go and make another kill so that they can eat. So I love the social structure. Also, there is another side to it. If a sub-female mates, which sometimes happens, and she has pups, the alpha female can be vicious about that. She can really be very nasty. But generally, the sub-adults don't mate, and they all work collectively to look after the pups. And these are the points that have made the wild dog so fascinating for me.
They've got a certain discipline and moral.
They have. And yes, I love the fact that you're using the word moral, because that is what the wild dog population or the wild dog pack revolves itself around, is a morality and a discipline within the pack. Yes.
And that gives us our freedom, if only we understood it.
Precisely. It is what the philosophers have been talking about for years and years and years, but too few people buck the trend. Too few people stretch the envelope beyond. The wild dog doesn't. The wild dog knows its discipline, and it works within that envelope, and it does what it possibly can, given what it is and who it is, to work that discipline. The other thing that I have found extraordinary about them is that they're not a threat to us humans. They are curious about us. They want to know who we are. And I had an extraordinary experience, which is in the book, which you'll read about. Anna-Marie, you've read about it because you've looked through the book, but other people who buy the book will find it in Tanzania, in the green grass of Tanzania. The pack of 9 dogs came up to us. And there was a herd of wildebeest and their calves, and they were kind of taunting them a little bit and teasing them, which is very much part of the wild dog mentality. They love to play, which I want to talk about, but just let me talk about this, their curiosity.
Please do.
And they came closer to us, and they were curious about us. They wanted to know who we are. And they came right up close. They were smelling my toes, because I was sitting on the running board of the vehicle. And they came right up close, smelt my toes, and peered into the lens. And that was just the most extraordinary experience, their curiosity. And I have noticed this so often. And in my book, Nick Murray from Bushlife Safaris and Bushlife Conservancy in Zimbabwe has denoted his experiences with the dogs, where he was sitting watching them and they were chasing a warthog. And the warthog ran past him and bumped into him and bashed his leg open with its tusks. The dogs killed the warthog just behind Nick after jumping over him. And on their way back after feeding, they came and they smelt his leg. They smelt human blood. They were not interested. And they went on their way.
This is absolutely remarkable. Your dedication that you've done right at the beginning of this book, there's something that just, it really grabbed me. And you said that speak out loudly for the animals of the planet. Without them, our world lacks spirit. There's a whole lot said in that sentence.
Yes, I really believe that when we commune with nature, beyond the flowers and the insects, that we really start to understand the animals of the planet. We start to understand their place, their right to be here, and their right to be wild. And we understand that they form an integral part of our well-being, because without that understanding and expansion of our own heart and our own spirit towards the animals, and to level them up with us, yes, they have their own intelligence. I think without recognizing that we are kidding ourselves that we are superior beings. I think we're kidding ourselves that of a very important part of our understanding. When we start to understand our animals, and we have respect for our animals. We have a greater respect for who we are as humans. We have a greater respect for our type of intelligence, and we have a greater respect for our type of speaking and our voice, whereas the animal has a voice. They have a way of speaking. They have an intellect, which if we're too wrapped up in our own intellect, we can't understand theirs. We can't expand to theirs, yet they will be curious about us and our intellect and our intelligence. And I really am so saddened that over the years, people put their interpretation of how the dogs and how animals in general should behave. And that has brought about this demise and this killing of animals at random. I mean, if we think about the inverted commas big white hunters of the early 1900s coming into Kenya, President Roosevelt and his entourage killing en masse all sorts of animals, from elephants to wild dogs. If we think of the decimation of our wildlife in South Africa, and thank goodness we've got the Kruger Park, and now we've got all the reserves dropping their fences so that animals can walk their paths and they can do what comes naturally to them. What comes naturally to us as humans is very different. We have learned to be natural. We've learned to be natural within our construction, within our homes. We've learned a whole different way of being. But that doesn't mean to say we can ignore the intelligence of animals, that they work like our birds. They work with the magnetic fields of the earth. And we need to know that. We need to understand that and to recognize that intelligence.
And as humans, we think we know a whole lot. However, we should be humble because what we know is just a tiny drop in the ocean of knowledge regarding animals.
Correct. We don't.
Yes.
We don't. The fact that the wild dog has been maligned, has been misinterpreted and misunderstood all the years, and they were treated as vermin. And because they, like the leopard and the cheetah, were treated as vermin, they were shot out, but more viciously than the cat. The farmers used to go find their dens, certainly in Zimbabwe and other parts of Africa, and it's happening still in northern Namibia, where the farmers think that the wild dogs are going to take out a sheep or their goats, so they go and find the dens, they blow up the dens, they set them alight with the puppies inside, they shoot the dogs. They go out on horseback in Namibia to try and find the dogs. The dogs in Namibia have become ghosts. They move, and there are very few left there. Finally, the minister in Namibia has come out in support of the animals and protecting them. But getting to the people is a different story. Now, this is what happened many years ago, and right up into the 70s in Zimbabwe, dogs were, if a farmer brought in a dog tail, they were paid 5 shillings. And 5 shillings was a lot of money in the 70s and 60s. So that's what they did. They hunted the dogs. And to bury a dog body is very easy. They're small. So dig a shallow grave and pop it in, and that was that. Nobody said anything. So the dogs have been seriously hunted as vermin and taken out. So we have this precious collection or remaining dogs of 6,600, and slowly they are starting to grow. And in my book, there's an article by Dr. Harriet Davies Mostert, who heads up Wild Dog Advisory Group, which is a group of volunteers, of vets, of environmentalists, of ordinary people, and myself as a photographer. We get together, discuss the latest developments, keeping track of the number of pups born, the number of pups surviving to maturity, to become yearlings. And Harriet's also part of Endangered Wildlife Trust. Both organizations are very well supported by Wildlife Act. Wildlife Act is an extraordinary organization that fully supports growing wild dog populations. And they help, for example, if there's been a breakout. So the dogs have gone out of the reserve in which they are supposed to be. Now, I've just recently been at Mariani in the KZN, there was a breakout. And the dogs got into the next door reserve, which was all right. They were a little bit safe there in the next door reserve. But then they got into they chased an Inyala through the electric fence. The Inyala broke through the fence and the dogs ended up in community territory. Now that is dangerous. The particular community on the other side of the reserve, they had actually last year, they killed 2 dogs. They stoned them. We have to really look after our dogs. There is a happy ending. They managed to get the dogs back into the neighboring reserve. And now they're busy trying to get them back into Manyani, and they've closed up the fence. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's a sad ending.
You spend a whole lot of time with these animals. You formed a bond. The photographs that's in this book is intimate. It's emotional. It's really not just another photograph. You actually got to know them, and I believe that they got to know you as well. What was the most heartbreaking event?
I was in Zimbabwe. I was at Manor Pools, and we'd been tracking with the dogs. It was the time when the BBC were filming the Dynasties series, and they did a program on the wild dogs, which actually was the most popular of the 5 in the series. And so we were tracking with them, and the dogs had woken up, and the dogs are quite predictable. They wake up at about 5 o'clock. They had gone down to the river to drink to the Zambezi, but there were lions. So they moved through the bush. We couldn't move as fast as they could, but they moved through the bush to a pool of water, and they were drinking there. By the time I got there, the pack was standing on the opposite bank to where we were, looking in a direction up the river and up this big pond. And there was consternation in them in their stance. One dog was going woo, woo, which is the call that the dogs make when they're anxious, when they're calling for a dog. When they've lost a dog in a hunt, they call woo, woo. And hopefully the dog will come and respond. The pup were gingerly going to the edge of the water, and an adult would come and chase them away. What had happened then was that Tennessee, one of the dogs, had come, she had drunk and did not see the crocodile, and a crocodile had grabbed her front paw and dragged her into the water. And as we were watching this, so there was an eruption just a couple of meters away where all these crocodiles leapt out of the water, and all you saw was the color of the dog being ripped apart. I could not photograph that. I was absolutely in tears, and I was just totally bereft of I was totally bereft. And we stood, this is in the book, we watched the dog, they formed various little groups, they kept looking, they kept calling, and eventually there was this armada of crocodiles coming towards them, and I was like terrified, and I was going to go and chase them, which of course you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to get involved with nature, but I thought, no, I cannot allow this to happen. I just can't. And at that particular moment, one of the dogs turned away, and there must have been the alpha, and called the pack, and they started to move off. They regrouped themselves, and in the book there's this it's a wonderful photograph, but it showed the demeanor of the dog. They walk in when they're upset like that and they've lost a pack member, they walk in single file with their tails down. And that to me was the most heart-wrenching experience. And I think it's also one of the reasons that prompted me to start African Wild Dog Survival Fund, because I want people to support the fund. I want people to buy the book because all the royalties go to African Wild Dog Survival Fund. And I also want people around the world to know the sentiment of these dogs.
I'm sure that there were times that made you giggle and laugh.
One has to be very quiet around the dog, but I absolutely love the pups because the pups are still new to the world. So at the den, you don't go anywhere near the den, at least, you're standing well back, so one needs a very long lens. So when they're newly born, they are very tiny. And in the book, you'll see photographs of a newborn pup and then one being carried by its mother by its head. The pups had come out for the very first time. It was an absolute privilege to watch this. They had come out for the first time. They were greeted by the adults with such jubilation. They were licked and they were smelt and they were loved and just welcomed to the world. And then Violet the mum decided, no, this is enough. This is their first time out. Now they need to go back into the den where they're safe, and she's got control. And she picked them up, and she picked up the one by its back leg. It was screaming its little heart out, and she popped it down into the den. And then she came back, and in the book there's a photograph of her carrying the one into the den with his whole head in her mouth, and he's looking into camera. And I was like, oh, that's just got to be the best. And also when they play, oh, that's what I really want to talk about, the way the dogs play. They love play. Just think of how our domestic dogs, love playing with toys. They love toys. They'll chase a ball. They'll chew up a bone, a rubber bone. They'll steal from each other. This is what the wild dogs do. And they will look for something like a stick, a clump of grass, a piece of very dry elephant poo. They'll pop it into their mouth, and then it's game on. It's chase, because the others want the toy. And they'll go chasing after each other, and they'll run around each other. And it can be anything like a feather. And there's a photograph in the book of a dog being chased with a feather in its mouth. And the speed that they get up to is extraordinary. And just watching them at play just brings such joy to your heart. You're just like, oh my goodness. It's like watching a pack of our dogs, of big dogs, play. They play, bite each other. And yes, the ears got to get a bit chewed up, and those big satellite ears, which they use and to pick up sound, and just makes their look so dramatic. But their play is something extraordinary, and I just love it when they give chase. And they do it all the time. They do it all the time. As soon as they've eaten, they have a game. They might drink, they have a game, then they settle down. Animals work on clockwork. They have an extraordinary sense of timing. As I said, they wake up at 5 in the afternoon. I've noticed this in Zimbabwe. I've seen this very recently I was at Mala, and I saw that with the pack of wild dogs. We were sitting with them, waiting for them to wake up, and Bob's your uncle at 5 o'clock. Then they woke up, and game on, and running to the water, playing with each other, having the most fabulous time. And also they have a lot of ceremony. They sleep after eating, so they will hunt just before dawn and just after sunset, because they need to hunt before the big predators, before the lion and the hyena. And so they will wake up and they have a ceremony. And their ceremony is they greet each other, they check that the pack is together, they smell each other, they lick each other, they kiss each other, they come together, they make quite sure the pups are all right, and then they start to move off. And sometimes the couple of adults will go off, leave one adult with the pup in a safe place, and safe in inverted commas away from a hyena, and the adults will go and kill, and then they'll call, and the pups and the other adults will come and feed.
What was the most remarkable moment?
That was the Tanzania experience, where the dogs came right up to me, and I wasn't afraid at all. There was no fear in me. I was just totally overwhelmed with this extraordinary energy coming out of the dog, and to have him peer into my lens and to look at me and say, well, who are you? Yes, I know you. And my experience was, I still have to get to know who you are. I have so much to learn about the dogs, and I'll spend at least the next 2-3 years with the dogs, as much as I possibly can. Yes, I love to photograph other animals, sure. But the dogs give me variety. The dogs have got movement. The dogs have got demeanor. They've got behaviors which I've seen in domestic dogs and love. I've bred domestic dogs, and I've bred Cairn Terriers, and I absolutely love that and just love dogs. So why not? The one thing I do want to point out is that the wild dog has 4 toes. A domestic dog has 5 toes. And based on that, there is a stream of thinking that wants to convince the world that they are not dogs, but they are wolves. The origin of the wild dog is a wolf, but that wolf line and lineage is no longer in existence. And so as animals do, they evolve differently. And I think we really need to take a note here from Darwin. We need to see that the wild dog so long ago and lost contact with the wolf pack of its origin that today all that remains are the photos. But for the rest, its behavior is dog. And the similarities between wild dog and domestic dog have to be recognized. They have to be recognized.
Everything you did was remarkable, but there's one thing that you did that outstood the other remarkable things, and that is that you involved people with the knowledge and expertise to share in this publication. Who are they and why them?
I'm ostensibly a photographer. I wanted my message to go out to the world. And I also recognize that there is a huge amount of academic work being done on the dogs. There are papers being published regularly. And that information is not going out to the world. And I wanted that to go out. So I got hold of, for example, Professor Scott Creel from the University of Montana. State University of Montana in the US. Now, he has been studying the dog for many, many years, and he's involved with the Zambian carnival program. So he's written a very, very good article for the book. I got him involved because of his history of writing papers and publishing papers on the dogs. Rosemary Groom, Dr. Rosemary Groom, CEO of African Wildlife Conservation Fund. She's up in Zimbabwe. She's doing amazing work, and her biggest problem is snaring. So her dream is, in conversation with her, her dream is to put together an anti-snaring team. And she needs funds for that. So I wanted to give her visibility. Then we've got Dr. Harriet Davis Mostert. I've spoken about her. 20 years ago, she started Wild Dog Advisory Group, and she's been literally doing this on her own and slowly, slowly attracting people. I wanted to work with her to come together on a voluntary basis. So that's why I brought her in. Dr. Dave Drews from KZN Wild Dog Management Group. He's also involved with WAG, and he's an ecologist, and he's doing extraordinary work. They build bomas. He works very closely with Wildlife Act, and they build bomas. They look after the dogs there. And because of the link up between themselves, between Wildlife Act and Wild Dog Management Group, you have a stronghold for quick action when it's needed, for translocating the dogs. For example, they will boma dogs. They will take dogs from various packs, put them together in a boma, get them to befriend, and when the pack is working as a pack, they will then organize to get that pack transported to a reserve which is sustainable for wild dogs. Now, not every reserve can sustain a pack of dogs, and not every reserve wants to have a pack of dogs. But that's why I got Dave Drews involved. Renee Walker, she was an undergrad at the time. She's a PhD student now. She did a fascinating piece of research on sneeze to leave, when to go hunting and who decides when to go hunting and how they communicate. She discovered that they sneeze. They give a through their nose, they express air through their noses, and that is an indication to go. And the higher up in the pack the member who sneezes is, the less times they have to sneeze before the pack moves. So if an alpha goes around and says, "Come on, guys, time to go," and he sneezes or she sneezes, the pack will move off. Nick Murray, also, I've mentioned him and his experience, and then of course there's Dr. Peter Apps from Botswana Conservation Trust. They are doing very interesting work. They discovered that the dogs actually mark territory. Now, we know dogs mark territory. We know all animals mark their territory. So they are now trying to create a chemically based scent marker, which various reserves can use to keep the dogs safe within a reserve, within an area. Just gives an added dimension to the book. It gives substance to the story, and it gives respectability or tangibility. Not that my work is not respectable or tangible, but it just adds a dimension.
How much time have you spent with the African wild dog?
Put it this way, over the last 5 years, I started seriously photographing them in 2015 and took through to 2018, and 2019. So I was photographing for 5 years. And what was very interesting, Mike Gunton, He wrote the foreword to the book. The producer and director of BBC Natural History Department, and I met him in Zimbabwe. He had come to launch his the episode on what was called the Painted Wolf in the Dynasty series. He'd come to Zimbabwe, and he was actually at Nick Murray's place, Constant Bushlife Safari, and I met him there. And I had a conversation with him over dinner, and I said to him, I've got these wonderful photographs of the dogs, and I think I'd like to have an exhibition, my first exhibition, and I just wanted to be on the dogs. And, about 6 photographs, just put them up somewhere. And then we talked a little bit more into it. I said, well, maybe I could do 12 and we could turn that into a calendar. Well, this is the calendar. The book was 18 months, and, that was between design and final print. And so, yes, and then I met Merlin Unwin at the London Book Fair last year, and so they've very kindly picked it up, and they published the book, and Penguin Random House South Africa are distributing for Africa. Production of what was going to be a 6-photograph exhibition is now a book. 120. What's a 240-page book?